here we go with round one, and we are being punished immediately. We are playing Tectonic Edge and Mountain. We do have 12 green sources, but we don't have any in our hand. And the thing is that we are on the draw here, and if we draw a forest by turn 2, then this hand is very, very good, with the potential to just drop insane cards basically every single turn. But we don't have a guarantee. Now, 12 green sources means that we are a little over 1/3. We have a little over 1/3 chance to get that green source by turn 1. And by turn 2, the chance to not have drawn a green source is approximately 2/3 times 2/3, which would correspond to not drawing them in both of these draw steps. And 2/3 times 2/3 is still 4/9. So it's just a very rough calculation shows that we are basically 50% to not have green on turn 2. And this hand desperately wants green on turn 2. So as sad as it is, I think we have to mulligan this hand. And then we open up a hand that only has a single land. So now we are looking at being in a position where we need to draw a land, and if we do, then we are able to Fauna Shaman and then hopefully Tarmogoyf at some point. I think this hand isn't amazing, but I like it better than going down to 5. Let's see if that works out. The thing that's favoring us is that Fauna Shame can actually get some mana acceleration out of our deck. So we can get Boreal Druid, trading it in for Indrik Stonepolar, for example. And we can get the Borderland Ranger as well. Raging Ravine is a little awkward. We would have loved to have that on turn 1. And we do need to get Fauna Shame in play as soon as possible. But the next turn is going to be the difficult one. If we don't draw an untapped land, then we kind of want Tarmogoyf to get there. Our opponent has some nice mana fixing here, and managed to shuffle away a card from the brainstorm. So that's looking pretty sweet. Farseek is a nice draw as well, so maybe it's not even necessary to get that Boreal Druid, but we have to be kind of scared of what our opponent is capable of here. I kind of like ramping up to 4 mana so that Stonepolar and Gadokteeg become viable, and I feel like this is our safest bet when it comes to whatever he could drop next turn. Now, if it's a creature threat, then we are somewhat in trouble, but if it's a non-creature threat, then we could potentially take it out with Stonepolar or Primal Command. I'm going to test the waters here with Gadokteeg, because if he's sitting on something like Cryptic Command, he almost has to counter it, as it would just mean that he wouldn't be able to use it otherwise. Now, we are pretty much protected from Wrath of God at this point, so let's get Vengevine. Oh, that doesn't work. No, I thought we could get Vengevine and discard it, but of course that's not how it's going to work. We could still get the Vengevine and play it next turn, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. So the question is, how are we going to win this game? We have a lot of ways to play around mass removal, and Vengevine is probably still the best way to go about things. So I'm going to take that, but still drop the Tarmogoyf here. I think it's too important to have the aggression up. And I'm relying on Teak here to protect us from most of the mass removal that could hit us. Teferi is of course a card that can be cast despite Gadokteak, but... And it does mean that our creatures might get ambushed at some point, but there isn't really much we can do about it. So now the Vengevine train should get rolling here. Kind of like Experiment 1. It's going to be mutating immediately, and we are going to trigger a Vengevine, which is our main goal here. So to me, this looks like a pretty strong turn of events. We might be relying on Gadokteak a little bit too much, but if our opponent isn't on something strong here, maybe a Titan, then feeling pretty good. Okay, that's a problem. Don't really know why our opponent did that before we went to attacks, before we went to beginning of combat. But, oh well, I know. He wanted to have the spell cast before the Mauler could grow. So that's fine. Soul of Temptation is definitely a problem card, and I would love to have Burst Lightning or Firebolt now. It's going to be quite difficult to punch through. Blastoderm is large enough to get through Tarmogoyf, so that's important, and it grows Experiment 1, so trading it in for something else doesn't seem like a great idea. We can Primal Command any non-creature permanent, or we can get another creature card of our own, but we're just going to draw Blastoderm here. It's always possible that Tarmogoyf grows again, but let's hope that's not going to be a problem. I like our opponent's deck. I have to say it's looking quite strong. Taking 2 here for a couple of turns is not a problem at all. Now, this produces green, white, and black. We don't know if our opponent needs it, but it certainly fixes his mana the best, given that he also has Reflecting Pool. So it's a card that we might just want to destroy. We are going to draw lands that are going to be good. Well, we can use our lands to cast Wormcoil Engine and Woodland Primus, but I don't think it's very important to be able to do so now. Now, Primal Command, we could use to just Time Walk or to get something like the Wormcoil Engine, and then go from there. Now, that has to be better than Tech Edging right now, and what we can actually do... Oh, yeah, maybe we won't cast Primal Command because we have our Gadokteak in play. So, I'm just going to destroy this and then pass the turn. I still have to think that Gadokteak prevents more spells on our opponent's side of the board from being played than in our deck. We only have Primal Command and Green Sun's Zenith that are affected. Maybe I want my opponent to play some spells so that the Mauler grows, but right now I'm just going to wait what happens here. The scary part is that our opponent is able to flash in his creatures, so that could become a problem at some point. I still don't want to suicide my creatures into Tarmogoyf, so I'm just waiting to draw a creature that I can discard to Fauna Shaman and then get the Worm Coil, which he is going to have to deal with. And that's going to negate most of this racing that's going on right now. Whoa, another manland. Manlands are nice, but don't really help to get us out of this. At some point we might be forced to suicide Gadokteak, but looking at the matchup, it's basically guaranteed that Gadokteak shuts down more of what our opponent is doing. So Terran Mauler getting bounced to our hand, and I think that's actually good for us. It was somewhat of a threat, but now it's going to turn into Wormcoil Engine or Woodfall Primus. So we don't want to draw cards like Boreal Druid, but we know that we can turn any creature we draw into a big threat later. So I don't think it's particularly important to thin out our deck, because drawing lands is even worse. So I'm just going to try to resolve the Wormcoil Engine here. And if we don't, that's a problem, and Tarmogoyf is going to grow, so all of this is going to be quite awkward if it doesn't work. We could have played a land here to play around Mana Leak, which would probably have been correct. Okay, yeah, the creature-based threats of our opponent are a big problem, and we are going to need to bring in a way to deal with Sour of Temptation, which is basically winning the game on its own here. Going to block the Wormcoil with Gadokteak. I know that it enables all of his sub-spells, but I'm probably forced to Primal Command here very, very soon. Okay, given that we don't really have a way to deal with the sowers, I think that the command just delays the inevitable, so I'm not going to show my opponent more cards and try to win game 2 and 3. So we definitely want Firebolt and Burst Lightning, and we might actually want Winter Orb. Probably don't want Ulamog against a deck that's keen on stealing our stuff, so Firebolt and Burst Lightning, pretty easy inclusions, I feel like, and then we want the most high impact cards we can get against his Teferi Sour clone deck, basically. So if we bring both of these in, we could maybe cut something like the Lumberjack. I don't think we are necessarily winning the very fast game against him, and we can't go all in if we have to fear something like Sour of Temptation. What I do like somewhat is the Winter Orb. I think we could potentially lock our opponent out of the game. And Rancor also seems like a card that could mean, even if our opponent steals one of our cards, that we are still able to push through. Now, there is the problem that we aren't going to be able to bring in everything. That's just not going to be realistic. So we kind of have to see what we can do. Primal Command didn't really look to have a very good use, and we couldn't cast it under Gadokteak. On the other hand, Gadokteak is usually going to be good against a blue control Shell. On the other hand, he might really be so creature-centric that Godok isn't really doing much for us. So maybe Godok is the card that we want to take out here, and we just want some of the answers to what he's trying to do, rather. Yeah, I think that's probably what we want to be doing. And most of our cards are pretty good threats, so I like to keep them in. I think Stormhowler is another card that we might want to take out, but I'm very scared of him having something like Vidalcan Shackled, so we need the Stormhowler. Obstinate Baloth, maybe another card that we could do without, as the life gain against him shouldn't be too important. Now let's look at how this looks like. I do have the Rancor to maybe get some early action going, but the question is if a Rancor is really better than another large creature, under the assumption that we are going to be able to deal with his creature stealing. Yeah, I think Rancor is probably too weak. Let's play the Baloth instead, and do without Primal Command and Godok Teak. We're going to play first. We have a nice keepable hand, so that's good. Not going to mulligan. And actually, we have the absolutely uncastable Woolly Thoctor in hand. But with both Survival and Fauna Shame, it isn't unlikely that we are just going to be ramping up here pretty quickly. I kind of like dropping Lotus Cobra because it's going to be great as soon as we draw a single land. And if we don't, we can still attack for 2, so... As sad as it is, we do need to get our mana going, so I'm going to drop the Druid rather than Fauna Shame, even though we might deal a little less damage that way, and hopefully we can get Tanglevire down. This card looks like it's Vesuvan Shapeshifter, and I feel like we have to get more board impact going, so I like developing our board here. We can get a mountain, play it, get a green of Cobra. And now we have either Survival or Fauna Shame available to us. With Fauna Shame just attacking for 2 basically, but Survival allowing us to maybe get the Vengevine into the graveyard and drop the Mauler anyway, or just get the Tanglevire into play. So survivaling is definitely stronger than having the Fauna Shame available. On the other hand, the fact that we can attack with Fauna Shame might just be good enough to drop it onto this board. Let's try that and keep the survival for later use. I'm also going to offer the trade between Lotus Cobra and what I think is going to be the Shapeshifter. No, Nantuko Vigilante, not a particularly exciting card, but it would have killed both Tanglewire and Survival, so good that we didn't drop the Tanglewire there. We naturally drew the Vengevine, so that's quite interesting. We have the potential to go for Tanglewire here, and I think we should take it. We can also do a little bluff attack with Borderland Ranger first. Okay. No bluffing here. We could have just cast the Vengevine. Maybe that would have been a stronger play, but I really want to get Tanglevire onto the battlefield. Probably going to get Experiment 1 once again, and then just drop both the Mauler and Experiment 1 with Vengevine coming back from the graveyard. So Woolly Thoctor has to go, as it's just too hard to cast it. Tarmogoyf also a nice card. The thing is that we are going to have to tap 3 permanents, so Borderline Ranger and Faunashem have to be tapped in order to play this sequence, assuming that we don't draw a land. So getting the 1-drop here is the safest play we can make. Now, we do want to remove the Fate counter first. And then we're going to tap these 3. Draw another land. Okay, so we could have dealt a little more damage here maybe, but hopefully that's not too important. Now at some point our opponent is going to start sobering again, so that's going to be the interesting part. Maybe even getting our Mauler and putting a lot of pressure on us that way. Currently he's still under Tangle Wire pressure, so casting Teferi here means that he has to tap both of his creatures when the Tangle Wire trigger resolves. There is basically no good way to get around the Tangle Wire trigger, and our opponent just realized that, I think. We had him on lethal, so casting Teferi there definitely not a great play. And the thing that you could have done was to tap all his 5 lands, then let the Wire trigger resolve, and then cast Teferi. But then we would have still attacked with everything, and I think probably won this one. So yeah, overall I think we just have to try to get him like we did here, with an efficient draw, or maybe locking him out with something like Winter Orb, Tangle Wire. If the game goes longer, we are definitely not favored against his multitude of stealing and copy effects, but as we've seen, he might just not have them, or just not have the right cards to deal with what we're doing. I'm kind of intrigued by Ulamog, but against a Sour of Temptation deck and a deck with a lot of copy effects, and the fact that it costs 11 mana, means that it's not the card that we want. So I'm assuming that we are going to be on the draw here, and I'm going to keep. We have the all-important Firebolt, so that's a huge incentive to keep. We don't have a Survival or a Fauna Shame yet, but if we draw one, that's going to be very good as well. Most of our draws are very nice here, so I'm pretty optimistic. Arid Mesa actually gets us a Plains and grows our Tarmogoyf, but we still want to Farseek because it allows us to just cast Vengevine on turn 3 and then follow up with the Tarmogoyf. I think that we want to thin out our deck with the Mesa, so we could potentially just do that now. It does generate some extra mana with Lotus Cobra, but we only have 2 targets left, so I think we definitely want to get that over with. And I'm currently contemplating whether to get more forests or to just get all of our other lands onto the battlefield, and I don't really see a reason not to do so. If we draw Survival, even 3 green sources is going to be a lot, so don't think that there is a problem. We also can't get a forest with Farseek, so we basically had to get both the plains and the mountain if we didn't want to strand either of these cards in our hand potentially. So let's see what our opponent has here. Another morph. Not really a lot of information there for us. We could We could try to kill it with Firebolt, but we are dominating it on the board, and if our opponent has a Vesuvian Shapeshifter to trade with it, then we can hopefully drop 2 creatures and get it back. Also quite interested in Tectonic edging the Sower of Temptation. But of course first we are going to Firebolt it. So casting Firebolt on Sower here has to be correct. And I also like Tech edging his Jungle Shrine, as it might mana screw him. And then the last question is if we want to play the Tarmogoyf this turn. And that's interesting, because if this is a Shapeshifter or anything that kills the Vengevine, then we want to be able to drop 2 creatures next turn. And if it isn't, but well, if it's Vesuvian Shapeshifter and we drop the Tarmogoyf, then he gets a copy of Tarmogoyf of his own, which isn't as scary right now, but it could grow out of proportions very quickly. And we also don't really want it trading with Tarmogoyf. So this is kind of interesting. On the other hand, we do want to maximize the pressure we are putting up. So dropping the Tarmogoyf has a lot of upside as well. I'm just going to do it, and that's because we don't have a second creature in our hand to guarantee that we can get back Vengevine. I'm not sure if that's the correct line to take here, though. I didn't even try to Firebolt the Morph. It's just too dangerous that it's just a card that we can't kill. And if it's not unmorphing, it means it's just a random 2/2, so that's fine as well. Could be Brine Elemental. Our opponent might very well play the Brine Elemental, the Vesuvian Shapeshifter combo. I don't think it's Nantuko Vigilante, because it could have traded with Vengevine. And I also don't think it's Vesuvian Shapeshifter. Just going to animate the Treetop Village and see what happens. We could cast the Troll Ascetic first, but don't see a good reason for that. So, no combat damage. Yeah, that's a nice time walk from our opponent. And we are still absolutely uncertain what the morph could be. I'm pretty sure it could be Brine Elemental now. It could also be a card with a lot less impact, like Willbender, where our opponent just didn't have a way to deal with it. I'm kind of confused why our opponent is GGing, because he still has the Moment's Peace in his graveyard. So it seems kind of weird to GG at this point. Might just be mocking us as well, but we don't really know. I usually GG back when my opponent GGs, but if the situation is as unclear as it is right now, I'd rather have some more information first. So maybe I could have played better in the face of Brine Elemental here. That's not a big concern. Once again, holding back Experiment 1, because we have Vengevine and Survival and so on, is an option. But I don't really like our matchup here, so I want to get this over as quickly as possible. And this was, in fact, a Vigilante. He didn't block the Vengevine, maybe because he was scared of me getting it back, but I think that he had to try to do so. Now, of course, he's gone, so we won't be able to GG back. But if somebody GGs and the outcome is just not clear at all to me, then I'd rather see what happens first. I've been GG'd a couple of times when the opponent was about to play a backbreaking spell, and that's just not a great thing. Okay, looks like we managed to beat the 2 draws where his deck wasn't performing as well as in game 1. And we are off to round 2.